So one of the other things I wanted to do was to quickly share with everybody some of the things I learned about Chablis in reading about the area leading up to this meeting with these guys, and subsequent study that I did wanting to learn more about the area. And so I put together a little presentation of sorts to give it a bit of context. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you afterwards. Okay, let's do a little quick breakdown on the history of wine in Chablis as best we can. Chablis is located here in the northeastern part of France, in one of the cooler areas, whereas a huge vast amount of French wine comes from down in the south here and over towards Bordeaux, some up in the Loire Valley. But this is, where Chablis is relative to everyone else. For context, in 600 BC, the Phoenicians arrived in southern France, and when they came, they brought grapevines with them and started some of the first plantings. In 200 BC, the Romans came and took over, and as they spread through what they called Gaul, they brought the vines with them to support both the empire and the troops. But then, let's keep in mind that grape pips were found in parts of France around near Lake Geneva, near Switzerland, all the way back to 10,000 BC. So there is some history here. And as the Chablisian would tell you, that the real foundation of Chablis is not with the Romans or the Phoenicians, but it's with this Kimmeridgian soil, this limestone fossils that goes back to the Cretaceous period, between 66 million and 145 million years BC, where the era that we're talking about is just a little dot out here on the far end. So let's get back to the modern age here. In AD 92, Emperor Domitian put a stop to grapevine expansion in Gaul because he wanted to see other grains and produce being grown. I don't know whose side he was on, but in 276, Emperor Probus came in and said, hey, let's let vines grow anywhere in France they can, and so vines started to grow up into the Loire Valley and into the northern areas, where it maybe was cooler and wetter than it was in other places, and maybe less reliable, but still made some very nice wines. So in 510, there was a monastery of the monks of St. Loup that was set up in Auxerrois, which is just next door to Chablis, here, in the next valley over. And that St. Loup, I looked it up, was actually a son of the royals of Burgundy. So I don't know whether he was really good or he just had an inn. But anyways, that was really the beginning of wine in that area. And then in 876, all right, let's get this out of here. The monks from Tours, let's get the, sorry, monks from Tours over here in the center of France, in this case it was the Saint Martin, the monks of Saint Martin, were moving away from the coast because the Normans, the Vikings, had come and been sacking, and they were set up at the end of the Loire Valley and the end of the Seine, and driving these guys inland. And they had an inn with Charles the Bald, who was not bald. He was actually pretty hairy, I guess, but it was because he was the youngest son of the Holy Roman Emperor Pius. And because he was the youngest son and the other sons were much older, he was born without any land, so that's why he was bald. But in the end, he came in charge of all of France, and he made a deal to turn over the area that is Chablis to those monks, and basically gave them ownership of the whole land. So they hung out there and did their thing for a while, but then in 1100, I don't know whether they got tired of doing things their own way or what, but they made a deal with the Cistercian Benedictine monks from up north in Pontigny to lease part of their vineyard. I don't know, it was 30 hectare or so. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, and they did it for the equivalent of about 2,250 liters of wine, which doesn't seem like that much to me. I think that the Benedictines got a good deal, but what they did was they set up France for the future and really laid in the foundation of winemaking there. So, hang on, let me keep myself going here. The interesting part about this area is that it was kind of a disputed area. There was a 100 Years' War going on. There was a lot of unrest in the Middle Ages, and because of where Chablis is located, it's right on the border of the Counts of Champagne and the Duchy of Burgundy. And whereas it was normally under the protection of Champagne for quite some time, in 1477, it became proprietorship of the Duchy of Burgundy, and that began the real resurgence of or growth in the area, because shortly thereafter there was a printing press put into town, and stuff grew, amazingly as far as the population and the activity in that area. They had one hiccup that was not so good. In the late 1500s, the Calvinists, the Huguenots, came in and burned the town. I don't know if they had something against wine. I don't think they did, because eventually when they got kicked out of France, they went to South Africa and helped start making wine there. There was about a 200-year period where not a whole lot was going on until the French Revolution, when the land was basically redistributed, and our friends, the Benedictine monks, no longer had control of it. It was taken away. But by then, there had been a huge increase, and Chablis was producing wine from close to 40,000 hectare, which is just a huge amount of property. Now, that's all well and good, but then they ran into some rough times in the late 1800s because of diseases that had been brought from the Americas back to Europe, especially phylloxera. It devastated the vineyards of Europe, and everything went bust. It took some time, because also following on the heels of that, let's switch over to here, around 1900. Oh, I did forget to say that right when that period was that they were having a great resurgence in wine, and they had all that acreage. They were in a good position, because the wine used to flow from Chablis, actually not up the River Seine, because it was not navigable. They tried to make it navigable for a little while, but they would take it overland over to the River Yonne. The department Yonne is named after the River Yonne, and they would go up the river and to Paris. And they were making bank on that. But then, right before phylloxera hit, their first threat was the train came and started being able to bring cheap wine up from southern France much more effectively than they could on the river. So between that, the bug, and then, wrong era. After the new century turn, first we had World War I, then we had World War II, both of which were hard on Chablis because of first a lot of young men leaving for war, and then also the city being bombed. So things were in rough shape. And then in the 1950s, 1956, they had some really cold winters, some severe frosts, and it devastated the vineyards to the point where they were down to 500 hectare, just a mere fraction of what they had before. And it's in this last little period, from the middle of the 20th century to now, that Chablis has been resurrected, reborn. They had to replant here, and then they finally got some mechanizations. They got tractors and things like that in the 60s and 70s. And so what we're seeing of Chablis now is based on a lot of hard work that folks did after all of that devastation. And so we are now being able to enjoy something that was once the wine of kings and is now just becoming really available to the rest of us. So, santé. Oh, I should also say that if you're looking to find out more about Chablis, I highly recommend this book by Rosemary George, The Wines of Chablis and the Grand Auxerrois. It talks about not only the structure of the area and the history, but it's a comprehensive guide to the people and the domains in Chablis. And so you can't get better than this. Sure, there's stuff you can find on the internet, but nothing as comprehensive as this. So this is where you want to go. Santé.